Hello, YouTubers, friends, compatriots, bootlickers, shills, deaths, servers, peasants, vassals, minions. I'm a useful idiot. Welcome. And today I want to go to Syria and talk about Kobani. Well, Kobani, Syria is a Turkish town in the north part of Syria, just on the border with Turkey. And it has been a safe haven, relatively speaking, for Kurds through the Syrian civil war. But just like the ISIS assault on the Kurds, finally, turning on the Kurds in Iraq, we have the ISIS forces now turning on the Kurds. And I first reported on this a couple weeks ago because it was a major event that ISIS was concentrating on its major foes before turning on the Kurds, who they had sort of an understanding with up to a point. Although certainly in Syria, ISIS and other Al-Qaeda associated forces had been unleashing atrocities on Syria, on Kurds in Syria for the last 4 years. And we haven't really heard too much about that, although I've been diligent trying to report on these events. And so now we have what appears to be the inevitable fall of Kobani and potentially a massacre of the Kurdish fighters that are left there. 160,000 some odd civilians have already fled the city and are now living in Turkey. And of course, the pivotal point here being that the Turkish military is actually in Turkey looking on the events going on Kobani. They have a massive armored unit and forces on the border there, and they are doing nothing to help the Kurds in Kobani. And so this makes it a very dramatic event, particularly when, if and when, there is retribution against the remaining fighters there. And so one of the reasons why this is going to have huge implications is because it will be a huge break between the Kurds and Turkey, I would suspect. If the Kurds feel that the Turks stood by and did nothing, and there was a massacre in Kobani, it will be hard for the Kurds to forgive, and that will be Kurds throughout the region. And we're already seeing some of the results of that. We have Kurds demonstrating protests and violent protests in several major cities in Turkey right now. And incidentally, we actually have Kurds all over the world protesting about Western inaction, including Kurdish protesters storming the European Parliament in Brussels, as well as Kurdish protesters in Hamburg, Germany, being attacked by pro-ISIS supporters with machetes and knives and sticks. And so this is has a global presence, but I'm not surprised. There's some 60 million, I believe, Kurds living around the world. They're the largest single ethnic group now without its own country, is my understanding. So anyway, this will change the whole dynamic. And one of the reasons why Turkey has this problem is because they have a Kurdish population in their own country that they've been struggling with for decades and nearly a century. And the PKK is the armed wing of the Turkish Kurds, and they're labeled a terrorist group by both the United States and Turkey. And the United States is actually working with the PKK in Iraq, but Turkey and the United States find it somewhat more problematic dealing with those same elements in Syria for some odd reason. And but a lot of it is just the complexity and hypocrisy of U.S. And Western treatment of the Kurds in Iraq and in Syria. The Kurds in Syria have been all but abandoned, and this will prove that point. And where there was a no-fly zone created to protect the Kurds from Saddam Hussein, and now we have the U.S. finally stepping in not to protect Iraq, but to protect Kurdistan, and yet we still have this continued abandonment of the Kurds in Syria. And we hear about all these atrocities, the outrageous atrocities in Iraq, and it's used to escalate these events, and yet we've had a string of all these same atrocities in Syria for 4 years, including several massacres of Kurds there, but still nothing was done. So we're going to have a reevaluation by the Kurds of their relationship to the situation in Syria, and certainly whether they would participate. There would probably be no chance they would participate in any effort to topple Assad at this point. And I would imagine that the Kurds in Iraq are going to reevaluate their situation. And that's going to be very complex because Turkey has a very strong relationship with the Kurds in Iraq. And Kurdistan has a lot of investment there, a lot of interest there, a lot of strategic interest there. Having Kurdistan as a buffer zone, that will all come into question, as well as the ongoing negotiations between Turkish government, and the Kurds in Turkey. This whole arrangement there could find itself breaking down with the fall of Kobani and any atrocities that it might come along with that. So along with the change of the relationship that Turkey and the Kurds have, which is going to be very dynamic, and it's really going to have a huge effect on the whole dynamic of that region and all these strategies. What we also see is a very evident failure of current U.S. strategy. Certainly we've heard that airstrikes are not being very effective, and we certainly find that to be the case in Kobani, although it sounds like the number of airstrikes in the region was a handful at best, which will also reinforce the idea that the coalition in the United States has abandoned the Kurds, has abandoned Kobani. And like I say, first we focus in on the failure of this strategy and what it could possibly achieve. But that's one of the areas where we have to examine that strategy, because perhaps there's a strategy behind the strategy. Because the fact of the matter is, ISIS is armed with heavy artillery, which is very easy to spot, and it's hard to hide. And we have heavy tanks, which are also easy to spot and hard to hide. And feasibly, the United States, with little effort, could actually take out all of that equipment in one day if they applied themselves. And it really wouldn't take that much, but that wasn't done. So that's another very serious question about the fall of Kobani and this entire U.S. strategy, and certainly the Turkish strategy as well. And then we also have the idea that the Kurds are the ones on the ground, whether they're the PKK or the YPG or the Peshmerga. All of them are on the ground doing the hard work. And so it's rather ironic that the Iraqi army has failed, the so-called Free Syrian Army in Syria has failed, and the only people taking care of business on the ground, protecting Western interests and taking on ISIS head on and doing a good job of it is the Kurds. And so all the more ironic that they're the ones getting betrayed. And so it makes to my eyes, it makes the likelihood of justifying independence all the more likely, because it's Kurdish blood that's being spilled, and they're in a lot of ways being abandoned by the West, although certainly the West is stepping up their efforts to help the Kurds in Iraqi Kurdistan. Those efforts are making some achievements, but this abandonment of the Kurds in Syria is a big matter. And another result of this, of course, is we're going to have a rather huge continuous border between ISIS caliphate and Turkey, somewhat like a 500-mile long stretch that they will share. So that will be interesting to see what the dynamic will be there. Turkey is right on the border now, so we can see clashes. We know that some of Turkey's conditions for authorizing military action in this campaign is the idea of creating a buffer zone or a no-fly zone, and or both. So let's see what happens when ISIS comes border to border with Turkey. Certainly that's going to make things a lot more complex too. So anyway, I guess we will watch and see now. Unfortunately, it will be in slow painful motion that we see the fall of Kobani, and unfortunately we can expect the worst. And as I've said on many of my videos, my heart does go out to all my Kurdish friends, and those who hear me say that may scratch their heads, but it's the fact that I've been doing videos about the Kurds and the Kurdish cause in Kurdistan for quite a couple of years now, and I've had the good fortune to have a lot of Kurds respond to my videos, and I've had wonderful interactions with so many of you, and you know who you are. 91 Music Boy being my first, and my heart goes out to all of you, my Kurdish friends, that have to watch this, and there we have it. So I'll probably end up doing another video when Kobani falls, unfortunately, with what I always call the gruesome details. I'm a useful idiot. Don't you be one too.